All right, Alex, another episode of Opt-in is here. We have 5 minutes on the clock, and today I want to talk about forecasting and capacity planning. Kind of because we already talked about it already with Lindsay Frey in an on-demand webinar, but I wanted to get some thoughts from you. I think forecasting, capacity planning, goal setting in general is a step that a lot of people either skip or neglect or just gloss over when they're building out an SDR function. A lot of insight from Lindsay in this one. Wanted to get your top takeaway. I'll go through my top takeaway, and then we can leave the audience with some insight and wisdom.
Yeah, 100%. So for me, it was definitely, you mentioned the goals there and sort of how setting those affects the way you plan out the capacity, all that. And I think it's something people know, but often overlook sort of how important it is to set goals that really align with the SDR's capabilities and get them moving in the direction you want. And a lot of that can also come from pressure from above, right? If you have stakeholders or you have C-level people who are just looking at numbers, it can be easy for them to say like, hey, look, you have 2 SDRs, they're doing this much, let's double the SDRs, well, it'll double the production, we'll double the revenue, right? But it doesn't work that way. And a lot of times when that does happen, it puts more pressure on those SDRs. They start performing with different metrics in mind, don't do what they're thought to be capable of. And it doesn't actually have anything to do with the SDRs. It really has more to do with the goals and how they're trying to achieve those instead of sort of focusing on what they were already focusing on. And even sort of that idea of doubling the team doubles the output is also, I think, a bit of a misnomer. I think that works, again, with hard numbers, but when you get people involved, every SDR is different, every SDR performs differently, and so just saying like, hey, we'll just like, let's just clone those SDRs, like that's not possible. And I think a lot of times there's that disconnect between setting goals based on numbers and setting goals based on people. And if you don't take both those sides into account, you can get lost pretty easily.
Yeah. The way that I look at it is that math can scale infinitely. Like 2 times 2 is always going to be 4, times 2 is always going to be 8, times 2 is always going to be 16. Really testing my multiplication tables there. But like sales doesn't work like that. Like you said, if 100 activities equals 2 booked meetings, 200 activities doesn't always equal 4 booked meetings. There's a point of diminishing returns that SDRs have just in general, to the point where like, if they're making 100 dials a day and they can book 2 meetings, if they make 200 dials a day, the quality of those dials will eventually dip at a certain point, whatever that threshold might be. And we talked about it during the webinar. There are a ton of variables that go into determining what that threshold is. The tools that you have in place, the ACV of your solution, how much marketing support you have, what your total addressable market looks like. There's a bunch of stuff that goes into figuring out where that threshold is. And once you get past that point, you've hit capacity for your SDR. And understanding that is super important to figuring out, okay, I have this ultimate goal of closed won revenue or total booked meetings from this function. And then working backwards from there, understanding, okay, like if I need to generate $1 million and I figured out that I need X amount of qualified meetings, which is X amount of total conversations, which is X amount of total activities, and that that's triple the amount of what your SDR can produce, you need 3 SDRs. Simple as that. You can't just push that one rep to do triple the work and expect them to get the same result, because diminishing returns will kick in, burnout will kick in, churn will kick in, and then you start just burning resources and ultimately burning money. So I think that was like the big takeaway that I got from the webinar, was that there's an idea in a lot of people's heads, like you were saying, that you can just double and get the same output from that. But in reality, all you're doing is putting too much pressure on your reps to produce at a level that they can't, burning through them, churning them out of the organization, and then spending more money to bring more reps in. And you're just rinsing and repeating the same cycle and losing revenue the entire time that you're doing it.
Yeah. And I think burnout's an important thing that I don't think we touched on too much in the webinar, but it's a huge factor, both in terms of bandwidth, right? To train someone new, to get them up to speed, to give them the pipeline of the person that left. And then financially, like you have to go through all the HR processes. You have to rehire the person. I don't know what the math is. It's like a 40% of their year one salary or something is the cost of hiring. There's studies on that stuff, but it's clearly a way more efficient, both from a revenue and bandwidth standpoint, to keep people as long as you can. And if those goals aren't aligned with what the SDRs can actually do, that's actively working against keeping those talented SDRs at your company.
Yeah. And the last thing that I'll say, kind of the other larger takeaway that I got from this, is that when you think about the goals that you have in place, think about what the end goal is, but obviously the type of end goal is different for each function. For some organizations, they need that SDR team to produce a certain amount of closed-won revenue. For some organizations, the SDR team is tasked with creating enough pipeline revenue or just booking enough meetings. It depends on the maturity of your organization. Thinking about that end goal influences how you then measure your SDR function. If you're a newer organization, you're just trying to get booked meetings sort of in front of your sales team to gather intelligence, start penetrating the market, just get some new customers, you want to incentivize quantity. You want to get as many meetings on the books. That means you are incentivizing higher levels of activity. On the flip side, if you're a more mature organization and you really want the closed-won revenue from your SDR organization to be how you measure the success of that team, you want quality. So you're focusing less on the total number of activities and you're focusing more on the actual activity itself and making sure that the individual is qualified, that the SDR is asking the right questions, that they're setting up the AE properly, all of that stuff. So misaligning those incentives can really shake up the organization. If you're incentivizing quantity and you're looking for quality, you're going to have a ruptured team overall. So you got to think about that as well. It's not as cut and dry as a lot of people think.
All right, AJ, 15 seconds. Tell everybody about opt-in.
Opt-in, quick 5-ish minute videos, actionable sales development tips, minimal fluff. You can find us on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on our Instagram, and on the website, demanddrive.com.
Is that what that is?
You're talking to the wrong guy.
Find me the right guy.
I think you're actually a better guy than me. You're like literally going to school for this.